So, hello everyone and welcome to today's webinar. Thank you for taking time out and being here today. This is Asun Angulo and I'm a member of the admissions and marketing team in Deusto Business School Executive. Many of you have already been in touch with me so far, and well, if you want to inquire about innovation, I'm certainly your person, as that is my main task. This is already the 12th and closing session of a cycle organized by Deusto Business School from the beginning of the lockdown, in which, with the help of our experts, we have been raising reflections as to how the COVID-19 crisis will affect us in the individual, social, and business level. This session will run as follows. After the speech delivered by our expert, we will open a live question and answer section. You can find the chat represented by two speech bubbles at the bottom of the display. It is already open and you can type your comments and questions there throughout the session. We will make sure the speaker receives all of them. Also, a recorded version of this webinar will be available on demand at #DeustoKeepItUp. Our agenda today brings us Professor Carlos Osorio. Carlos Osorio is a professor at our Master in Business Innovation. He's also co-founder and senior partner at UCAN, a global design and innovation capability building impact research lab based in Chile. He is, or has been full-time, and visiting faculty in universities in Chile, in Lithuania, the Singularity University and MIT in the USA, in Argentina, the Netherlands. His teaching, his research, and consulting focus on strategies, processes, and methods for innovating in highly risky, uncertain, and complex environments. He co-authored the D5 method, which received the 2015 Wharton QS Reimagine Education Award for the best approach for enabling innovation learning in the world. In 2014, Carlos was featured by AACSB and Visit magazine in the UK among the world's 4 leading faculty on enabling innovation learning and building autonomous innovation teams. Carlos holds a PhD and MS from MIT, a Master in Public Policy from Harvard, and a BS in Engineering from the University in Chile. And this is all for now. Enjoy this webinar, and without further ado, I pass you over to Professor Osorio. Hi, Carlos.
Hello, how are you? I'm just setting this thing up here and we are ready to rumble. Thank you very much for being here today. We will, as Asun said, we'll go and go about a little bit of what has been this situation we are living in, and the idea of how we can sell this C in a much better way. Now, the summary about this on this topic has to do with basically these 8 things. First, that crises, and we will talk about this, are amongst the most powerful sources of innovation, and we will say why. Also, that we will discuss a little bit about the top management support role in terms of supporting, opening doors, and silent control, and the way in which we have to demand performance at the same time that providing tools and resources and support. Otherwise, if we have to do something, and many things we have to do here, if we don't do this, the way in which top management and not the people who are doing the work actually is responsible for whatever this succeeds or not. Also, the relevance of failing as soon, as fast, and as much and as cheap as possible, but without making mistakes in an environment like this one. The reasons or the way in which we can design teams according to challenges and processes in order to perform in a much better way, and the difference of this team designing in this situation, how different it is from this situation from the business as usual, or what we're used to it. how we have to plan for uncertainty and risk and the ways in which we can do it, and the reasons and ways in which we have to focus on process and not on results in situations like this ones. And we will finalize by using or going through 9 simple rules for taking action in situations like the one we are having now. I'm assuming I was looking at some of you guys, and well, I see some of you were former students, so you will know a little bit of what we're talking here, and you will be able to connect some of the things we saw in class to what we're talking today. Some of you not. So for those of you, I will give you a little bit more of context. Okay, so a lot of people have talked about how this current situation has generated disruption in our daily lives, and it's true. But not only in our daily lives, and if we had to understand what disruption really means from a business perspective, we'll see that disruption from perspective from innovation, disrupting innovation, it's a measure of the impact in market structure that any type of new technology, significant changes in business or customer expectations, or even catastrophes can generate. And the reason is, one of the most interesting things about this is that these are the most common health causes for disruption: innovation pace, right? Customer expectations, technological change, regulatory changes, and new competitors. But when we start to analyze all the different sources of disruption, and the one we are having now, this oddity of nature is one of the major causes, but one of the few that in most countries, people don't pay attention to. When I say most countries, because when you live in a country, on a high-risk country, in terms of nature, like mine, for instance, I'm in Chile. We are the most seismic country in the world. We have about nearly 1,000 quakes per year. You know what it means? A 6.5 or a 7 earthquake here doesn't make much of a change in our daily lives. But the same thing in countries like Haiti or another regions generate a pretty high impact. The reason why I'm saying this is that what we're living today is an oddity of nature that most of us, even though we have warnings for the last 20 years, most of us didn't pay attention to it, and it's now generating effects or kind of a domino effects in many other areas of disruption. So this is something that is being multiplied in many folds, right? And why it's so hard? The reason why it's hard is that we have been used to travel, live, work, in a situation like, compared to this one, it's pretty calm. It's pretty, seas are pretty tranquil. It's pretty calm. That we don't have this much of risk, uncertainty, and ambiguity, unless you work on an innovation team in any country, in any company, because innovation teams, this type of environment is something that is pretty common to the innovation discipline, right? Now, and the reason why it is so hard for us is because we have many things planned, and now we are realizing that our plans are, when they face reality, we are facing different types of ways of inconvenience, of unforeseen things, and these are the things that are making our lives more hard. And not only the things that, our plans don't fulfill, or we are facing new things, but also the fact that we were not trained most of us were not trained to deal with this. This is the saying, a smooth sea never made a skilled sailor. It's pretty true for what we're saying now. Most people have not been, haven't had the experience to live and work in a situation like the one we have today. And the main reason for this is that we feel very uncomfortable with uncertainty, with risk, and we take a lot of time to adapt. And so this is one of the major things that I want to discuss today. Now, the first topic, or the first thing that I had it on the second slide was that that innovations or crises are among the most well-known sources of innovation. This book, The Source of Innovation, by Eric von Hibbel, is a former professor of mine at MIT. You can download it for free, actually, from his website. He goes and analyzes the different sources, functional sources, he calls, of innovation. Those things, those triggers that make people to mobilize themselves and create new ways of solving problems, and crises are among the top. You have crisis, you have problems, you have needs, you have new regulations, you have, unfulfilled or underperforming processes, but crises are among one of them. And one of the things we will see now during our talk is that it's not only that crises have produced some of the top and most innovative companies in the world, and you have just a few of them here in this slide, but also that if we don't tackle this crisis in a very good way, we might end up worse off rather than better off by just not doing innovation. And there is a research that proves that. Now, how do we face this type of situations? And we have three different levels of three different ways in which we have to approach this. One is the way in which we respond to the emergency. Second is the way in which we keep operations. And third is the way in which we prepare for tomorrow, right? And again, this is an environment that may seem very kind of impossible to do two of them. I mean, no matter three, right? Responding to emergency, most people just drive to that. Keeping operation is very difficult. So most people say, preparing for tomorrow, I won't bother about that until I have the fire under control. Now, if we go back and think about strategy, strategy is most often just understood as the plan we had to fulfill. But people sometimes they miss from their radar the other assumption, the ways in which we have to understand strategy as a pattern, basically the measure how we should operate, the process by which we design and execute and change our plans, the position that basically we want to achieve, and the perspective, the how far and how we want to get, or how far and how we want to go. And if we see, we have to, the frequency of change over time is from bottom to top, from lower to higher. I mean, our plans should be, change our plans, strategic plans should change at least 2 or 3 times a year. But actually people don't change it, and people do plans every 2 or 3 years, right? And this is something that's very relevant to what we're going now. Most companies are keeping their plans or are starting to change their plans, but not in the way we are supposed to do them, and not considering all the barriers, there's all the dynamics that are supposed to have it. Just think about this in terms of this figure of the strategy cycle. In the strategy cycle, most companies focus on their vision, their legacy and goals, and the implementation plans and milestones, without considering and seeing the barriers for execution, the dynamics, the cultural dynamics, or the organizational dynamics that keep on fomenting or strengthening those barriers, and the way in which we have to build capabilities to inhibit the barriers in order to go and start to move around and redesigning your plan and building capabilities and redesigning your plans, and doing this once and again and again. Everything that you see there in orange are variables that now are being threatened by the changes we have. And most people or most companies in many parts of the world are just decreasing the way in which, or decreasing or shutting down projects, and calming down just to see what would be or what would happen when this is over. And we have 2 ways of approaching this, right? Of facing this. One is panicking or not panicking. And most research from innovation at least says, we have to, even if we feel fear, and fear is a good thing to feel, we have to try to avoid panicking, because we know that our emotions are affecting the way in which we understand the problem, and also affecting the way in which our teams perform. So keeping things quiet and keeping things as secure as possible for the people within the organization now is critical, because the environment outside is super insecure and risky and uncertain now. How do we do this? And why is this so relevant? We know that our past experience defines our present performance. And the reason how, and the way in which this works is the following. Everyone from your organization who had at one point in time any experience of overcoming obstacles through perseverance over the long term have developed some models for managing complex situations, and also have developed some models to manage situations like this one. That's why people who have dealt with long-lasting, very risky innovation projects are the people who you might like to tap on, so they could help you to manage the situation and get out of this situation the best possible way. They might just be experts on innovation. They might know anything about the strategy, but they know how to tap and how to identify sources of risk, uncertainty, and how to mitigate them, which is one of the things that you want to do in situations like this one, right? Now, given that we have this, we have a problem. Most of our previous, best practices for dealing with any situation won't work in this way. This is something, this graph here at the bottom is something I asked once one of our Deusto MBI students, sorry, I think it was his third generation. I asked him to write the process they were following and the level of frustration they followed through the process. So we got into this, emotional roller coaster here. And we were able also to identify that the higher the frustration, the higher the number and frequency of mistakes they were making. So that leads to today and the idea and the purpose we have for trying to diminish as much as we can the likelihood of making mistakes that are going to be irreversible, meaning very costly mistakes from which we cannot recover. So that's the topic, okay? So the question is, how do we do it? How can we, make people to play the best possible music in a situation like this? Now, and we have two levels in terms of answering, two levels. One is what top management can do, and the second is what teams can do. In terms of top management, the first rule of thumb here is try to build a safe environment for risk-taking and creativity. That's basically the overall objective. And for doing that, first thing we have to do is try to avoid the hippos. The highest paid person in the organization, the top managers, the guy who has, the most stripes, the tiger with most stripes, or the leader, the guy who actually hire on the corporate ladder. That person, in this situation, he might have the authority, but it's very likely he does not have the wisdom or the last answer or the best way actually of how to behave in this situation. So this is not a moment for hippos. This is not a moment for people very high, for looking at people high and asking them and looking and waiting for their answers. It's neither a type in which or moment in which we, if we are one of those person, are the ones who are supposed to have the last word. This is a time also in which we have to act more like a coach and avoid micromanagement. Here, the idea is if we have people very high and top managers, maybe it's very likely that those people have had a lot of scars during their career, and they have a lot of experience in terms of how to deal with different critical and nasty and stressful situations. So this is the moment in which I take off all my general stripes and stuff, and I act much more as a coach than as a top manager, giving people challenges in terms of this is something we have to achieve, but avoid micromanaging and letting the people to act in the best possible way and unleashing their potential. Also, it's a time in which top managers have to open political doors and solve resource-related problems so that teams can go and achieve things instead of, giving reports and reports and reports. This is something that people from Sener, which is one of our great Basque companies, always the CEO always said to me, every time we have one of our project managers knock on our doors, myself and all the VPs sit on the table and said, what can we do for you so you can achieve your goals in the best possible way? This is one of the top priorities now for our managing situations like this one. Sudden control is something that we have to do. It's basically it's a measure between the balance between giving lofty challenges to people, inspire them for greatness, and trust their capability to discover and deliver. Because if we assemble team, as we will discuss later today, the subtle control is key. You know, you ask for milestone, but you let them free, okay? And cultivating creativity, that's why this is only can be done on a secure space. It's something we'll discuss later today. Now, talking about teams, I want to just use a metaphor I like a lot. And this is, I think, my metaphor in this case. I don't know if you have watched the Avengers. If you are my students, we have discussed this a couple of times. And it's funny because everyone here has their superpower, right? And one of the problems with the Avengers that even though they have the superpower for 2.5 hours that a movie comes, I mean, the last movie, they spend about 50% of the time, you know, or 50 minutes of the movie introducing the plot, and then 2 hours fighting among each other for just saving the world in the last 15 minutes. And this is one of the things that we don't want in our companies right now. We have a high risk and a high uncertainty moment, yes, or situation. We have people with different superpowers, and we need to mix them in the best possible way. Now, how to make it happen? First, we need to have an emotionally engaging vision that basically it's a mixture between strategic intent and collaboration. It's just, you know, how we need to have something to fight for. That's one thing. Second thing has to do with we need to create an environment in which performance is something that we aspire to. It's a result from stimulating people, right, to create these high quality results by mixing discipline and restrictions, and also making people responsible for their acts, right? And this only happens when also you have social support, which is basically a context of psychological safety that results from combining trust and support. Trust from the top management, trust and support in your people. Now, when those two things combine, right, the last performance management social support, you have four possible contexts: high performance context, a low performing context, a burnout, and a country club context. Now, just think about this. These are one company, one of the 100 top global companies on their field, right? And on average, the company is here. On average, pretty high. You would say it's going to the, you know, if you go back, you will see this is on a high performance context, right? On average. But the data from its 402 leaders is very dispersed. So what do we have here? First, we have people that feel that, you know, people here receive very low support or very high support. And also we have, you know, people that think that these company ranges from low performance to high performance. And this is something that now, if we haven't worked on this before, this is something now it becomes very critical, because people here, it's not people who are low performing. It's people that think that the organization is low performing. So these people is people that can do much more. You want to know who these people are. You really want to know who these people are and tap into their potential so they can help you get out of this situation. This is one of the most relevant things that we can do right now. Now, how do we do this? You know, and one of the things that we thrive for this, from the innovation perspective, is not only about the methods and the tools we use for doing innovation, which is fine and is relevant, but has to do with this, has to do with how different people on the same team respond in very different ways to the same situation. Here you have two guys, one guy who's desperate, one guy who is, you know, comfortable, same situation, same organization, working on the same problem, right? And one is just up and high and the other one doesn't know what to do. So what we have created is something like an X-ray. What if you could see it, people, you know, and you could see through them and you could understand, you know, what are there beyond the way in which they manage tools and methods and knowledge and frameworks, which is, you know, that's easy, or beyond what you can see on a resume, what if you could see through them and understand who can accept or who can resist more or less, for instance, risk? Who can tolerate more or less risk? Who can tolerate more or less uncertainty, and mix them? You know, this is something we do. So here's where diversity comes into play, but diversity with I mean, in a whole new ball game, a type of diversity. Diversity in terms of capabilities, you know, different people playing different instruments and different types of leadership. Diversity in terms of the way in which we manage uncertainty. Diversity in the way in which we can tolerate and enact upon the higher levels of risk or lower levels. And diversity also in the way in which we have access to tools, right? So when we put this all together and we start to see how we can get out of the situations like this, is when we start to analyze and we start to, for instance, to see the way in which team design or core team formation is relevant for what we're trying to solve and do right now. So these are some of the variables we use, and these are summary. First, you need diversity in terms of professional, technical, and background, you know, right? You need diversity in terms of gender. And research shows that from a core team of 8, the core team, the team that actually leads a project, the one who actually is on the first initial cell right there, you might need hopefully 4 men, 4 women, or, you know, 6 and 3, or sorry, 6, sorry, if not 4 and 4, 5 and 3, I'm sorry. Because I mean, that's the perfect balance to take the most of our gender specificity and the way in which we complement each other to get out of problems the best possible way. Also, diversity in terms of nationality or geography, areas of experience, finance, marketing, production, R&D, seniority, people from top to bottom. 8 behavioral traits that we will go into right now has to do with different, you know, tolerance to risk and tolerance to or being a disposition to be more creative or analytical thinking, and 15 related innovation-related capabilities. Based on this, you can create teams that can perform like this or like the one I'm going to show you. For instance, let's say 2 teams on the same firm, right? Here you have 2 curves. One is psychological safety, and this is frustration. What this team shows is, what this graph shows, that this team 1, as long as they were performing different tasks along the process, you know, psychological safety on the team start to went up, meaning they became much more comfortable. They managed their team dynamics in the best possible way. On average, their frustration went down, and also the type and number of mistakes they made decreased. Now, same firm, different team, different leadership. Here, you can see that psychological safety went down, decreased. So the group process went, you know, it started to become worse and worse and worse and worse. And by the same level of technical difficulty of the task, you know, the level of frustration started to go up, and the type and number of mistakes also increased. So that's just the point, to make the point, the following point is that psychological safety and team dynamics are critical for this. And the way in which you create your teams is a critical part of how you manage, you know, and you're able to design how a team is gonna behave. So by this point, one of the major takeaways is that, you know, the social emotional skills is much as are even, if not more important, than all the hard or technical skills that we take much attention to, and especially in moments like this one. The other thing is that on a team, in situations like this, responsibility is something that is shared. One thing, if you can do just one thing, don't assign any responsibility for a team to just one person now. Say, you know, pick your team, do it yourself. It's not that pick your team, because if one person is assigned responsibility and he goes and pick the team, if the team fails, you know, it's going to be his. Please try not to do that. Situation like this, share responsibility generates a bond that is hardly achievable by any other type of means. Now, if this is a moment in which we can break a lot of, you know, good ideas go very, very, very bad. And one of the reasons why we're saying that we have to now use our innovation tools for navigating moments like this one is like the following. This is the way in which we depict or we frame an innovation project, as a discovery-driven journey under risk, uncertainty, ambiguity, and complexity. A lot of uncertainty and ambiguity at the beginning, and as we move on, ambiguity and uncertainty starts to decrease, and then it became much more clear, which is kind of has this current situation as being for many of us. And innovation is, as we understand it as a process, a set of structures, stages, methods, tasks that when used in systematic ways, allow us to innovate in consistent, predictable manners, meaning we can do better in risky and uncertain environments. Why? Because these innovations as processes allows us to take advantage of the opportunity that comes from high risk, high uncertainty, and high ambiguity, while mitigating the impact of risk, uncertainty, and ambiguity in our organization. Everything we learn on innovation has to do with taking advantage of volatile environments and mitigating risk in our organization. That's why it's so relevant now to take some people from the innovation projects and help you to get through this situation the best possible way. At the strategic level, you need people who is able to be under the worst possible scenarios, circumstances, and stress, and be like the G.I. Joe kind of people, be like those who can handle that type of stress without blinking, right? Now, in order to avoid irreversible mistake, we need to differentiate what is a failure from an error, or from what is an execution failure also from an exploitation failure. An error or a mistake is anything that results from negligence in the use of methods, tools, resulting from having inaccurate information, lack of knowledge, working based on an outdated assumption, and so on and so forth. That's an error, something you don't want to do. Second, an execution failure is something that is expected in an environment like this. When you're running in an environment like this and you want to do something, you need to learn through failure. Otherwise, if we don't learn through small and consecutive failures, we will end up by making a huge mistake that is impossible to recover from. We're going to talk a little bit about how to do this. And the way in which we do that is, if we have an idea, if we have something we want to prove, and we try to prove the opposite of what we're trying to find. Basically, you don't try to verify things in this moment. It's the worst possible moment to try to, experiment to verify. This experiment to fail. It's much more cheaper. It's going to give you much more assurance that what you're going to do is right. And the third thing is the exploitation failure. That thing we want to avoid is that negative and irreversible loss or destruction of value that comes from basically from making bad decisions. Let's take this moment, the moment in which you hit point of no return, the moment in which you make a big investment decision. Most failed projects in situations like this work in the following way. You go and people start to verify things and everything goes according to plan. So what happened is that people decide to invest because everything is going according to plan. And then at one point, everything goes south. Why we say we have to fail often and soon? When in a project, you start to identify a lot of problems, and more problems, and more problems, and more problems. And then the rate of problem finding decreases. And also, given that you find a lot of problems, you also found a lot of solutions. That is the moment in which you want to go and invest. Not when there is no issue in an environment as noisy and as risky as the one we have today, right? So this is something that, you have seen, Hector and some of you guys who have been my students here, I've seen already. And this is something that we discuss and we train a lot for, problem finding first and then investment later. And the reason for this is the following, is that we want to be in this quadrant. Few mistakes, a lot of failures. Few mistakes and a lot of failures mean I'm not screwing things up, right? And I'm learning little by little about all the things that can go wrong before we actually make the irreversible commitment, before the investment. And not the other way around of just going and say, oh, okay, let's go because everything's going smoothly. And given that, we're gonna go and we're gonna invest in whatever we have to do. So the way in which we advance through different design spaces is this one. We start by inspirational prototyping, very few bucks, and we do a lot of many type of experiments in this way. Some feasible, few here, and 1, 2, or 3 validation prototyping here. But the way in which we do this is through failure. We do and we experiment and we learn as much as possible with spending the least amount of money and in the shortest period of time. Time is, we are in very time sensitive times, right? In this time, right? In this moment. So the point is taking advantage of risk and uncertainty while mitigating the impact on risk and uncertainty. Now, how do we do this? Based on the way in which we have to perform a stock management and the way in which we have to, design our teams for this type of environment. Rule number 1, take care of yourself and your people. The last thing you want to do now is having a key person on your organization falling sick or worse, right? So this is something that we have to be very careful about. 1. Second, we have to solve the emergencies yet, but we have to prepare to get ready for this, world that's going to be different tomorrow. And the reason for this is the following. We will not return to normal life. And there is one reason, there are at least 3 or 4 reasons for that. First, this is a high impact shock that has lasted for too long. I don't know if you just make this comparison. Every therapy for quit smoking, for weight loss or whatever, lasts about 12 weeks, 3 months. We already have been on a behavior changing or a changing behavior therapy without knowing or without wanting. So whatever we have done so far has changed our behavior, and this is something we have to take care about. You have to consider about, because given the level of uncertainty that we have, we are facing now many possible futures. And we have been normalizing some of these futures, through 3 or 4 months. And for the countries, I don't know, we are people from different countries, right? For some of you already have 2 or 3 months ahead of you. So you have to consider that whatever happens, you will start normalizing the future that is one of the features that today is available for you. And this is something that you have to consider, okay? Number 3, reframe your understanding on a daily basis. Whatever we are doing now, we have to reframe the way in which we understand what's going on. And the reason is that every one of us sees, the world in different ways. So this is one of the reasons why the hippos, must not go into the room, or at least the person, but not not his rank or her rank. We need to take into account all the different visions we have in the organization, and not choose one instead of the other, but try to make a mix of all these different ways of perceiving the world, because, every one of us is right in a little bit. By combining them, that's one of the ways in which we can see the whole picture. This is also some of the things that at the Masters, we take spend a lot of time working on reframing methods and tools with the students, which is something actually is pretty painful at the beginning, because you have to consider at least 40, 20, 30 different ways of looking at the same problem before going in. And we have to do it, like in 45 minutes. It is not something we can spend weeks or days trying to, make sense of things. Number 4, question data. Question the data you gather. Any type of data that goes into your hand that is summarized or synthesized, double click on it and see the variance. This is the moment in which all the indicators that we build to create data that's useful for us on a moment of quiet times won't work as well as they used to work. So question your data, double click on outliers. Outliers are going to tell you a lot a lot of good information. This also reads to rule number 5, which is try to refresh your understanding of what's going on by validating your hypothesis and assumption, by putting them to test. That's why experimenting is going to be so useful right now. Put them to test and try to see to what extent they are still valid in a moment like this. Most of them will not. There's an example, a case that we work on, and it's basically a bank that they thought they had 25 different hypotheses to solve an issue, and then they realized in a moment of quiet, right? Nothing related to it. 2 years before coronavirus, and they realized that there were 231 hypotheses and assumptions, and they were only looking at 25, right? Those are the reasons why we make mistakes. We cannot afford that in moments like this. Also, we talk about that we are here, right? And we have many different possible potential futures. There is something called planning for risk and uncertainty. And that has to do with the following thing, If you talk about, well, for instance, if you think about your key assets, activities, revenues, core competencies, components and complements, whatever, and allies, and you start to see the level of uncertainty that you are feeling now, and each one of them, we can actually go and map them, right? We can go and map what are the level of uncertainty for different type of asset, different type of activities that, given that is created by the current situation. And you will have those, in which there's high potential, you can do things because nothing's going to happen. They're just go, and they are still, and it's pretty clear what's going to happen. And also you have the red ones, right? Those in which, we don't have a clue what's going to happen. They're very unlikely, very unstable. If we don't take care of them, something very bad is going to happen to the organization. These are the ones you want to take care of. It's going to take about a couple of hours to just work on this and have the map completed. And then when you have all those in the red zone, saying, okay, now what do we do to mitigate this? What do we do to mitigate the impact of this thing that's going to happen? And I'm going to show you an example of this later on. Check about this. We have been warned about this for nearly 13 years. It's not that we did not know that a pandemic was coming. And most people didn't do much of it, but some people did, right? It's not only, remember that when I said that our past experience determines how we are gonna perform in the future? Wimbledon in 2003, they didn't have their best year in 2003, given the SARS outbreak. And based on that, they said, we don't want this to happen again. So for them, a pandemic was here. Total ambiguity, long-term. So what did they do? They bought an insurance, and they bought nearly $2 million a year, $1.7 million a year for 17 years. And now they are getting paid pretty much $150 million on the insurance. Now, this is something when you see something, based on your experience, and also you see something that might be unlikely, might have a high impact, you might not know when, but you take action and you mitigate the impact that this thing can happen, would have in your organization. Now, in moments like this, if we didn't do this, right, one thing we shouldn't do is completely stop the innovation efforts. There was a paper published in 2013 analyzing the luck or the basically process of 5,000 companies in Europe, based on the way in which they responded to the 2008 crisis and the 2009 pandemic, the H1N1 virus, right? And the authors found the following. From all the companies, about 9.3% of the companies increased their innovation efforts or sustained them through the crisis. And the rest, they shut it down. And what happened at the end of the crisis was that those companies that were better off after the crisis were the companies who have maintained or increased their innovation efforts. And the companies that were worse off were the companies basically that stopped their project. An additional finding was that those companies who stopped their innovation efforts during the crisis could not start them up again right after, but took a couple of years because the company was very, I mean, the crisis struck them too hard. And the other thing was that these innovation efforts were some of the ones who helped to pay the cost and the pain, of not actually of the crisis itself. Now, point A, give clarity and provide basic safety for your teams. This is something that's very clear because you won't be able to make it alone. I'm going to give an example of what the MIT people did. The president of MIT, 2 weeks after or 1 week after the crisis, sent an email to all student, faculty, administrators, people working in facilities, and alumni. And they were saying, you know what? We don't know where this is going. We don't have a clue, or we don't have so far a clue of what we're going to do to handle this. We are assembling a team, and we want to have an answer for you in the next couple of weeks. What we do know, however, is the following. If you are a facilities person or your administrator, don't worry, we won't lay off anyone. Second, if you're a student and you are on a scholarship, don't worry, your scholarship is going to be fine. We'll keep going with our classes. If you're a faculty, don't worry also, things are going to stay normal. We have a huge endowment and we will take care of our people. So check this. Basic psychological safety. Don't worry, you will be okay. We will take care of you. Now, how will we get out of this situation? We have to figure that out among all of ourselves, right? So this is something that's critical. Besides, it's going to point 1, take care of your people. 9, this is a moment for making not slow, but fast decision-making in uncertain environments. And also the disciplines of innovation has something to contribute here for. And this is a moment, or this is an approach to strategic decision-making in high-velocity environments that's pretty useful. First, what do you need? You need real-time information. So if you can press a button and have information from your company, like, in your press, you want to know the info, and the info is from 2 weeks ago, you are in deep trouble and you need to work in fixing that. You need information like in a couple of seconds, couple of minutes, no more than 2 hours of delay. Second, when you create alternatives, don't create 1, 2, or 3, create multiple, like 10, 15 alternatives or have to follow. Second, don't just have one team of people, deciding. Have 2 tiers. Take your, top management, divide it in 2, and feed that group with people from below, from different areas, and have 2 teams that have the same level of seniority and the same level of respect and knowledge, and have those 2 people having access to the same information and creating different alternatives. Also, consensus with qualification. What this means is like, if we reach consensus, it's not because, I have the more votes than you do. It's because we are reaching that consensus about what of these alternatives are going to be because of data. And if, for instance, and also because we are including people from outside the organization, like consultants or whatever, to help us, who are experts on different topics, and that will help us to get the best decision out of data. And decision integration means you can have 2 different teams and you have to basically come up and integrate the decisions into 3 ways of operating. 1, accelerated cognitive processing. 2, smooth group process. Basically, remember that, generating a group process with that ensures that there is psychological safety, people is respected, and confidence to act. Those 3 things will allow you to generate decisions making, or speed with decision making, being able to implement, try, experiment, and with metrics that allows you to have fast feedback. So you are learning through iterative, through iterations about what should be done. And this, I'm saying, this is for situations like this. Most people say, oh, this is impossible. Actually, it's not impossible. That's what should be done. The problem is that we have not been trained to do this when we should have been trained to do this. So in order to close, we need now, this is a moment of absorbing information, absorbing data, absorbing new knowledge from outside, trying to make sense of what's going on and why why things are unfolding the way they are, and learning. And the way of doing this is through fast, iterative, and effective learning. We need to be as fast as we can, and that's why we need to be worrying about three things, solving the emergency, keeping up with the operations, and solving the future, and not having three teams, one team that worries about the three things. And the second thing has to do that we need also, this is a moment for designing, experimenting, and executing. It's not only about thinking, it's about doing things. And the reasons why the thinking and the doing should be very hand by hand. And this is also a moment in which we do this in a fast, iterative, and effective way. So there are ways in which we can get out of this, but the thing is that the most of these ways, if you want to know who might help you, again, and this is and I'm closing with this, is basically going to your innovation teams and trying to find people that actually can have some of these skills and coming up to whatever help you in whatever you need to do. So I don't know if I want to stop the sharing here and open up for questions.
Thank you, Carlos. So now we will open the Q&A section. And we've already got some questions for you. And well, for everybody, this is the last opportunity you have to write your questions and get them answered. So Carlos, Christina asks, what kind of disruptions generated during this crisis do you think have come here to stay?
Well, the first thing is that I think for most people, one of the things that we have seen is that people is figuring out that they can live with less in a pretty good way. So a first thing that I think that when we see, I think, cause of disruption, one of the causes is changes in consumer behavior and expectation. One thing we have seen, we'll see that people after this is willing to save more and to be much more conscious in terms of what they how they spend their money. So I don't think that, and I think that will, in some cases, that will affect recovery. It's one. The second is that people is realizing now. I had a talk with people from a person from a very large engineering company, a worldwide engineering company, said, you know what? We realized people, most of our managers can work from home. We don't need all these buildings to do this. We need much less buildings. Not about, yeah, we are on the ground. We are in the engineering projects. In the engineering project, we need that. But even that is changing, we might not need as much, middle managers, because now cameras can do things and robots can do things. So at least those are two things that are changing right now. The other way is the way in which food is delivered. In the way in which, for instance, countries like ours in Chile, most people still most people still have nannies, at their homes, and they have been out of nannies for a month and a half, and they have been saving a lot of money. So I don't know if that, for instance, if people will be back at the nannies mode of working, or we will be much more like in Europe, right? In which you don't do that, most people, and there is a lot of consequence for that in terms of unemployment and in terms of also savings, in terms of procurement of purchasing things, consumption.
Okay, Mercedes says, thanks Carlos for the great lecture, full of insights. My question is about your statement. Companies have to create a psychological safe environment for their people. What if a company cannot take care of the people due to the impact the situation had on its accounting, production, or activities?
Well, it's a good point. And it's a very good question. So the thing is, how can you, minimize the harm you do. It's basically, I think that's part of the problem. For instance, what is being done here in Chile is that, or at least some other countries, like people is not necessarily firing. Companies are not necessarily just going and firing people, but putting them in a kind of a freeze mode, or decreasing, for instance, the level of wages and to everyone. So we know that, I mean, at one point you cannot afford paying people, but at some point you have to come back, you have to pass this, because this is going to be something that will last, I don't know, 3, 4, 5 months, right? And you won't have to let go someone who's valuable for you. So these are moments in which companies are going to be remembered for the way in which they handle this situation. And based on this, people might want to go back or not go back to work in companies like this one. So I think it's right. I mean, we cannot take care of everyone, but we need to be conscious of minimizing the damage that's being made.
Thank you, Carlos. Well, I'm afraid due to the time limit, we don't have time for much more. We've got our last question here. But, well, even if we didn't ask them all, as you are leaving in the chat, yes, as I told you before, be sure that Professor Osorio will go through all of them. So this is the question, Carlos. Do you think those are times for sustainable innovation at all levels?
Do you think, I'm sorry, I lost you a little bit.
These are time for sustainable innovation at all levels.
You know, everyone, I mean, all time is a time of sustainable innovation at all levels. I have a very picky approach to that, and which is something we said for our students. We understand innovation. Innovation needs to be sustainable. If it's not, it's half-baked. Meaning it's like, you know, getting any pie raw from the oven or not fully cooked. That is the way in which I understand any innovation that is not sustainable. We cannot solve a problem and generate problems that are, you know, unforeseen. And the reason why the unforeseen thing doesn't work for innovation is because we should foresee. Innovation is a business of risk, ambiguity, and uncertainty. If it's a business of risk, ambiguity, and uncertainty, it's our duty to foresee, not only foresee the things we really like to happen, but foresee negative consequences as well. So basically, are times for sustainable innovation at all levels? Yes, but they have been for many, many years. Just to go through one example, plastic took 50 years, great innovation, took 50 years to generate or become, you know, an environmental disaster. That was plastic. Fast fashion, Forever 21, Zara, etc. It took only 10 years to achieve the same. So great innovations, not sustainable, because they were not thinking on the unforeseen consequences of rapid turnover and discarding of clothing, for instance. It's a good point. Good question, Juan. Thanks. Pretty good question.
Well, maybe we can
do more.
Yeah, we can do more. Yes, the very last one, really, because this, I mean, the answer didn't take so long and we tried to. So Hector asked Carlos, do you think companies or societies, governments have already overcome the initial shock and they are starting to embrace the innovation opportunity this crisis offers? Or are they still wandering around trying to get back to the non-normal?
You know, it's a very good question. I don't have knowledge of all. Hector is one of our students, so you know, sharp question. But I don't have knowledge of most companies and societies. I do know though that many of them are now. They wish they have done this innovation thing before. I know of some companies who have done it, I mean, who have been tapping into the innovation resources that are doing pretty well. But I don't know, I mean, to what extent people is wanting to embrace now. I think that they see the relevance of it. but most that have not done it before, they don't have the capability of doing it now. So they just saw the relevance. And I have seen some governments also trying to tap into innovation when their innovation capabilities are not so very good, and not very good. So, and that is an issue, because one thing is embracing it now without the capabilities. It's not gonna get you out of it. But it's a good question. I hope they do.
Okay, I'm afraid that we come to an end. It's already 7:03. So thank you so much, Carlos. Thank you, all of you, for accompanying us. We had over 3,000 attendees following us from over 15 countries connected to this cycle. The whole team of Deusto Business School Executive hope you enjoy this cycle of webinars focused on the COVID-19 crisis, as well as this closing session. Thank you to all the experts who have been sharing their knowledge with us, 16 experts specialized in different fields of knowledge. We have been backed by 7 companies: IMD, HPE, Altran, Petronor, Real Instituto Elcano, BBVA, and SAS. Deusto Business School, as always, continue working hard, hand in hand with you to keep up to your needs. Should you feel innovation can make a difference to your concerns or needs for growing, visit our web, www.deusto.es, or write to me, asun.angulo@deusto.es, to find out more about our Master in Business Innovation and our Business Innovation Program. It has been a pleasure. See you soon.